Hello, I'm Richard Gisbert, and you're at The Listening Post. This week, the bin Laden story.
U.S. forces killed public enemy number one, Osama bin Laden.
Will the news media ever get the facts?
We cannot confirm at this point of time.
Tunisia, 4 months after the fall of Ben Ali, how new media teamed up with mainstream outlets to take down a regime. Bahrain's leading opposition newspaper writes its own obituary. And the global news media struggle with one letter that makes a big difference.
How Obama was killed.
Osama, confusing Osama's name with Obama.
It's kind of easy to do.
On Sunday, May 1st, a story came out of Washington that blew all other news off the front pages of the world's newspapers. At 11:35 p.m. D.C. time, U.S. President Barack Obama announced that Osama bin Laden had been killed in Pakistan. That announcement, the culmination of a manhunt that took almost a decade, set off another hunt, a concerted one, led by the global news media. They were searching for clues on how bin Laden met his fate. Much has been reported since then, but consider where the information is coming from. Primarily, U.S. intelligence and military sources, the same kind of sources that told us bin Laden was holed up in Pakistan's tribal areas when he was in fact hiding out in a suburb, the same kind of sources that had much of the news media reporting in 2002 and 2003 that Iraq had a WMD program. This is one of those, what do we really know, and how do we know it stories? Our starting point this week is Abbottabad, Pakistan, the last puzzling chapter in the life of a mysterious newsmaker, and the news that has been rushed into print and onto the airwaves, reports that are virtually unverifiable.
CNN breaking news.
The United States has conducted an operation that killed Osama bin Laden.
Al-Qaeda के सरबराह Osama bin Laden को हलाक कर दिया गया है.
It is going to have a resounding effect on the media discourse.
Bin Laden dominates the newscast today, including...
We have seen multiple occasions in this story where key details have been revised.
And obviously some of the information is being reviewed and updated.
It's hard to tell the difference between myth and reality.
Since we saw you last, how much the world has changed.
It was the biggest breaking news story to be broken by someone using Twitter, and he did not even realize it. Sohaib Athar, an IT technician living in Abbottabad, heard a helicopter hovering over his neighborhood and tweeted about it. Later, some more tweets went out in Washington saying Osama bin Laden was dead, hours before President Obama went on television to confirm it.
What's so interesting is that you see new media platforms like Twitter where news can break without official confirmation. The traditional TV news networks were following the news breaking on Twitter.
Whatever the matter is, and we don't know.
And you could see that on air where several anchors would talk about the speculation.
Forgive my rampant speculation.
There's been a lot of speculation.
I don't want to speculate.
But they didn't feel comfortable going all the way.
We do have a bit more information now that it is national security related.
And saying that they've learned that the United States had killed Osama bin Laden.
Americans reacted instantly, not just those crowds outside the White House. Baseball fans in Philadelphia were getting the news over their phones.
Boy, news travels fast, even in the ballpark.
And celebrating on TV. The media piled on the story, and many of their early reports turned out to be inaccurate. They proved that old adage that journalism is the first rough draft of history.
We cannot confirm at this point of time.
I actually have had a hard time believing anything so far. I've been watching how the media have covered this, and the story's still evolving, and I think that happens with breaking events.
In one initial accounting, the White House said that bin Laden had used his own wife as a human shield.
Hiding behind women who were put in front of him as a shield.
They said that bin Laden was armed.
He was engaged in a firefight with those that entered the area of the house that he was in.
That he was killed in a firefight. Now, we have now since learned that those details were not correct. So I think reporters were getting their information from White House officials, and it's only until they can go back and ask skeptical follow-up questions that the narrative changes.
Most of the time, the first version of something that happens winds up being substantially wrong. And I think it's going to take probably several weeks for all of the details of what happened and what Osama bin Laden was doing there to really emerge.
You could hear the president.
Until then, whether they're in Washington or working the story in Abbottabad, Pakistan, most journalists will rely heavily on political or intelligence sources to spoon-feed them the story leak by leak.
most of the time journalists, they do depend on the media leaks being provided to them by the intelligence setup. And we know that they have some motives, they have some agendas. But when this question is being posed, we should also ask the question, what is the alternative? Whom should we depend?
The news media needs to be very careful that they don't fall into the trap of just reporting the official Washington narrative and White House narrative.
Countless meetings here at the White House.
And that they go back and ask skeptical questions and find additional sources who can make sure that the story is accurate and not just the official version that the United States government wants to present to the world.
In the video age, seeing is believing, and the shortage of visual evidence, Washington's decision not to release bin Laden's post-mortem picture or images of the supposed burial at sea only added to the skepticism. They say nature abhors a vacuum. And it is in the nature of news channels to fill informational vacuums with opinions and theories. That has been the case in Pakistan.
There has been a degree of bewilderment and almost denial. Media personalities were outrightly refusing to believe that he had actually died. Later on, they were speaking of bin Laden in reverential terms, which is a little bit nonsensical because Pakistan has been probably the greatest victim of bin Laden's violent and murderous ideology. Unfortunately, what's also true is that Pakistan's mainstream media consumer doesn't have a lot of love for the United States for many reasons. So I think a lot of the media has conflated its mistrust or its distrust of the United States with either neutrality or even an appreciation for bin Laden.
For a man who was interviewed only a handful of times in his relatively short life, Osama bin Laden owed the media much.
His image was created by the media, but his primary purpose was to exploit the media, to use the media. He was a propagandist, he was a communicator. He understood that the mission must match the message rather than the message matching the mission.
The media's singular obsession on bin Laden as the only metric by which we can talk about terrorism and talk about efforts to defeat terrorist groups was actually pretty counterproductive in the long run. And I think over the next couple of months we'll see that play out because bin Laden didn't play much of an operational role in any of these terror groups.
The myth-making actually will not end with his death. In fact, it'll only increase because, of course, now the greatest incentive for mythologizing of Osama bin Laden will be within the U.S. government. I think there's a lot of things that bin Laden could be blamed for that will conveniently be blamed on him, whereas the reality might be more complex.
It was a mysterious house.
Reality is often more complex than what is depicted in the news. There is so much about this story we don't know that it brings to mind a famous soundbite from one of bin Laden's adversaries, something that was said after the 9/11 attacks that might well apply to this story.
There are known knowns. There are things we know that we know.
The announcement by President Obama that the al-Qaeda leader Osama bin Laden is dead.
There are known unknowns. That is to say, there are things that we now know we don't know.
How much did the Pakistanis know about the raid?
But there are also unknown unknowns. There are things we do not know we don't know.
Things we may never know about Osama bin Laden's life and how it came to an end. Our Global Village Voices now on the coverage of the bin Laden story.
The way U.S. media has handled this report has been, to be very honest, very unprofessional, I should say. The reason being, unconfirmed reports presented as facts on a lot of times, and all those reports are again contradicted by the U.S. government spokesperson. And if you analyze the on-ground situation, what you will learn is that the stories that are being told are actually logically impossible or near to impossible.
The story of bin Laden's killing is by and large believable, although one must also, of course, sift out some of the exaggeration that goes into the interpretation of what had happened. I think the bigger question is the role of Pakistan in all of this. And finally, I think the U.S. government had used this as a great opportunity for its own marketing purposes.
If you've got an opinion on the news media that you'd like to get on the air as one of our Global Village voices, we suggest you join the thousands of our viewers who already follow us on Facebook and Twitter. They go to those sites to find out what stories we're working on so they can weigh in. Or you can just get in touch with us via email. We're at listeningpost@aljazeera.net. Time now for Listening Post News Bites. Last week in our Africa special, we looked at the state of the media in Nigeria. We reported on a newspaper called This Day and its publisher, Nduka Obegbena. We talked about the practice of checkbook journalism in Nigeria and allegations that Mr. Obegbena has sometimes made the pages of his newspaper available for rent to politicians or other wealthy Nigerians willing to pay for positive coverage. Although we described them as allegations, we neglected to report that Mr. Obegbena has consistently refuted those allegations and they have not been proven. We regret that omission and wanted to take this opportunity to correct the record. In a development that typifies the deteriorating state of media freedom in Bahrain, Al Wasat, the country's leading opposition newspaper, has been shut down. Al Wasat ran into trouble shortly after the demonstrations began on the island. First, it was suspended over its coverage. Then 3 of its top editors were removed and the government took the paper to court. One of those editors, the editor-in-chief, has since been found guilty of fabricating news reports. One of the paper's founders and chief financiers, Karim Fakrawi, died in police custody. The official cause of death was said to be kidney failure. However, post-mortem photos of his body showed evidence of beatings and perhaps worse. Al Wasat's board has now decided to shut the newspaper down after dwindling advertising revenues meant it could no longer continue. May 3rd was World Press Freedom Day, but clearly the authorities in some countries did not get the memo. So activists for the media watchdog group Reporters Without Borders descended on the Syrian embassy in Paris to protest against the country's crackdown on the media. They threw buckets of blue paint onto the embassy's walls, the idea being that ink should be flowing, not blood. Journalists in the Middle East and North Africa continue to be targeted as authorities try to contain the free flow of information. Al Jazeera reporter Dorothy Parvaz has not been heard from since she arrived in Damascus, Syria, on a Qatar Airways flight from Doha. An Al Jazeera spokesman told us, "We are concerned for Dorothy's safety and well-being. We are requesting full cooperation from the Syrian authorities. We want her returned to us immediately." In Libya, Al Jazeera cameraman Kamal Al-Talu remains in custody. The Gaddafi regime still has not given a reason for his continued incarceration, what charges he faces, or where he's being held. The annual White House Correspondents' Dinner in Washington brings politicians and journalists together. It always features a speech from the president, and this time round Barack Obama focused on the media brouhaha over his birth certificate, which some news outlets, such as Fox News, had wanted to see.
As some of you heard, the state of Hawaii released my official long-form birth certificate.
The guest speaker was comedian Seth Meyers from Saturday Night Live, who used the after-parties to summarize the state of the U.S. news media. MSNBC's support for Obama, the New York Times putting its website behind a paywall, and the Huffington Post making big money for its owners, although much of its content is aggregated from other sites.
Everyone knows how the MSNBC party works. President Obama makes the Kool-Aid and everyone there drinks it. Fox News is having a party. Security is tough, so make sure you bring your driver's license and your long-form driver's license. The New York Times party used to be free, but tonight apparently there's a cover. So like everyone else, I'll probably just go to the Huffington Post party. And the Huffington Post party is asking people to go to other parties first and just steal food and drinks and bring it from there.
Things have been moving fast in North Africa and the Middle East. It's difficult to fathom sometimes that it's only been 4 months since the fall of Tunisia's former president, Zine El Abidine Ben Ali, set off uprisings and revolutions elsewhere. Not a lot of people saw the Tunisia story coming. The media there were tightly controlled. Freedom of expression was a foreign concept. However, the generation growing up under the watchful eyes and prying ears of the former regime found a way around the informational barricades. They developed an infrastructure in cyberspace that fed raw news material to the mainstream media and helped topple a dictator. The Listening Post's Nashwa Nasraldeen now on how the news floodgates were opened in Tunisia and where the media find themselves today in the early months of the post-Ben Ali era.
The Tunisian uprising took the world by surprise. But for activists there, it was an event they were well prepared for. For years, cyber dissidents had been building a digital infrastructure that would eventually help to topple Ben Ali's repressive regime.
The Tunisian internet resistance movement started, let's say, in 2000, 2001, and we were providing platforms, building blogs, publishing tweets in order to make the Tunisian average internet users aware about the political problems that Tunisia is facing.
Most of the Arab world, of course, the media are owned and controlled by the governments, and sometimes they're very repressive, more repressive than others. In Egypt, we still had some voices of dissent going through, you know, some venting outlets in the media. In Tunisia, this was not the case.
In Sidi Bouzid, a small town in the heart of the country, public displays of anger were rare. Until last December 17th, when a 26-year-old fruit seller, Mohamed Bouazizi, was driven to such despair by local authorities that he set himself on fire. His story, the culmination of years of humiliation, drew Tunisians onto the streets. Mobile phone footage of the protests was captured and transmitted, quickly making its way through the new informational ecosystem Tunisian activists had built.
That kind of triangle of media was happening. People on the ground are generating the content, they check them and they make them ready to use by mainstream media. And then on the top of a triangle, Al Jazeera is picking up the story.
On the line is Yusuf Gaiji, he's an activist.
Now, Tunisian TV is just broadcasting some propaganda and is not broadcasting this protest that you are showing on TV.
Or France 24 in the case of French.
Oui, ce sont des images amateurs. Elles sont tournées comme ça.
And then airing that back in Tunisia and informing the public.
The governments really didn't know what they were dealing with and underestimated the power of this new media. They blocked Facebook in Tunisia. Everybody was on Facebook in Tunisia. They tried to block Twitter. Everybody was on Twitter. Same thing happened in Egypt.
Prior to the revolution, political activism was mainly occurring on the web. Most mainstream media were towing the government line.
3, 2, 1, action!
Radio Kalima, which started as an online magazine, was an exception.
يوم 26 جانفي 2009.
We started broadcasting via satellite on January 26, 2009. The very next day, the police surrounded our offices and prevented anyone from entering. The journalists had to endure all kinds of harassment. As long as we were based in one location, it was easy for them to watch us. When they closed our offices, that was the real launch of Radio Kalima, because we dispersed ourselves and started operating like a network.
By broadcasting via satellite, Radio Kalima moved beyond the government's reach and control. The station became one of the few outlets able to allow uncensored political views on the air. Between stations like Radio Kalima and the new online ecosystem, Tunisia was changing. By the time Mohamed Bouazizi set himself alight, accessing and spreading images like this was easy.
The incident of Mohamed Bouazizi, someone setting himself in fire, is not the first. The unique thing about the incident of Mohamed Bouazizi is that people get to know about that through social media.
Social media, together with mainstream outlets, were breaking news, such as when government security forces killed protesters. The anger intensified, and the demonstrations grew until January 14th, when state-run television delivered the news many were waiting to hear.
Considering it is not possible for the president to carry out his duties temporarily, I will take over as of this minute.
The day after Ben Ali stepped down, we saw an uncontrollable media breakout from the regime's constraints. Everyone began to express their political views in writing. Everyone wanted to have a say, without knowing how.
Tunisians struggled to adjust to their new reality. The media suddenly gained a new lease on life, and it was finally time for independent outlets to take center stage.
People used to be terrified to talk. Now when they see recording equipment, they come to you. This is the most obvious change in my opinion. There's an enormous desire for self-expression, For us journalists, we have to be careful and sift through what is worth reporting. We used to be in an era of information scarcity. Now we have a surplus of information and views.
After the 14th of January, things are much better. Nobody has the right to say no to you. We can finally attend press conferences and interview people without being reproached.
But there are concerns, especially after a draft version of a new press law was recently leaked. It proposed prison sentences for journalists found guilty of defamation. Omar Mistiri is a member of a government commission created to preserve the objectives of the revolution. He argues any attempt to restrict media freedoms is a step backwards for Tunisians.
The Tunisian people have claimed back their freedom, and that freedom of expression is sacrosanct. We aren't used to it, so it's natural there'll be excesses. Sentencing people to jail does not fit free media or a society that has regained freedom of expression.
Tunisians fought hard for that freedom, and journalists know they must fight to preserve what they won. And they also know there are scores of people online ready to help.
We still need the same courage, we still need the same creativity, and certainly we gained the freedom of expression, and I don't think that the people who tasted and practices the freedom of expression will give it up one day.
We're just beginning to learn how to play democracy. We're just getting to start this game in the Arab world. All the revolutions that we've been through was just for our right to get out on the court, for somebody to let us go on the court and just play. Just start the game.
More Global Village Voices now on Tunisia and the media story there.
Post-revolution, cyber activism has two major roles to play. One is to keep pressure on politicians to follow the path of the people, not the path of unions, not the path of corporations, not the path of those who are following their personal interest. And the second major role is to help build the new rules of the democratic game.
Once people experience liberty, it is very, very difficult to take it away from them. Once they embrace the fact that they can do things before they couldn't, and in this case they can share with the world how they feel, it is going to be very difficult for the new Tunisian government, or for the future ones, to take some of those liberties away from them. So we are probably going to see a proliferation of blogs and Twitter accounts and Facebook groups, etc., that are going to be the offsprings of this revolution.
Finally, Osama bin Laden's death is going to be in the news for weeks to come. And for news presenters, pundits, and reporters in the field, it's going to remain an autocue nightmare. That one-letter difference between bin Laden's first name and the American president's last name has caused many an on-air slip-up in the past, and since bin Laden's death, it's been a tongue-tripping free-for-all on television. Already, the net's buzzing with news bloopers. We added in a few of our own selections to create our web video of the week. We'll see you next time at The Listening Post.
Thank you. May God bless you. And may God bless the United States of America.
President Obama speaking from the East Room of the White House, telling the nation and the world President Obama is in fact dead. It was a U.S.-led strategic, Osama bin Laden is dead.
Details that have never before been heard about how Obama was killed.
Confusing Osama's name with Obama?
It's kind of easy to do. It started when Obama took office. He directed the head of the CIA to make killing Obama their #1 priority.
Obama is dead. Federal agents discovered Obama's secret location.
Osama was hiding out.
The intelligence said Obama was hiding in a compound deep inside Pakistan.
Oh my gosh, did I say Obama or Osama?
So emotional to find out that, in fact, Osama bin Laden had been caught.
Obama was dead. Osama, I'm sorry.
They got a possible lead on where Obama might be hiding.
Obama's dead. I don't care. What did I say? Osama bin Laden is dead. I don't care how he died.
Obama.
Osama, Obama.
Thanks for clarifying all that confusion.